Really started with this idea of being in a predominantly white community and being the only Latina young girl. I was looking around and people had money or people had two parents in the homes. I see where people can be seen and it would be like beauty. So this desire to be noticed or seen kind of came up at first with a very early developed eating disorder that was a long struggle. So really it was just trying to find my identity and what people were seeing in me, which got me to this space. So there's good in it, but there was also a lot of challenges in it. I very much an academic and I love to think. So that opened up a whole separate space in my mind of having that kind of agency and control over something in your life. I wanted to help people, and going into a master's degree for psychology was just that thing. I did it. It was great. And it's literally been the most perfect fit since day one.
Welcome back to another episode of Through Help and Back. Thrilled to be here. Ian is here with us. Gosh, what is today? We're almost Valentine's Day, right? So love is in the air. Ian, are you excited for Valentine's Day? Do you have...
I'm excited for the Valentine's comedy night I'm going to.
You're going to a comedy night?
Yeah. I've never been to one.
Because your love life's a joke? Is that why you're going to a comedy night? Or what?
Can be sometimes. Yeah, I mean, that's a great analogy. It kind of takes the pressure off, honestly.
I'm kidding. No, are you taking a date or meeting anybody, or is this just you're just going to an event and seeing what happens?
It's funny. I have gone on a date recently, but
okay.
Not tomorrow.
Not tomorrow. No, she's not getting.
I'm going on a date with myself. Actually.
That's good. That's good.
So
I gotta think, man. I'm way out of the game, but I gotta think. Single at a Valentine's Day comedy event. There's going to be other people there. I'm going to think it's got to be an interesting experience. So you have to report back and see how that is. So
it's going to be a rom-com movie.
It could be. You could be headed for a meet cute. You never know. It could be the beginning of a story. So, which is a really interesting unintentional segue that I just did there when I talk about stories and narrative therapy. We have an expert in stories, if you will, an expert and somebody who practices narrative work and works with her therapy clients to help adjust and change their stories and write a new story. And that is none other than the Cassandra Wilson, a therapist from the Seattle area. Cassandra, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
How's life in and around Seattle? Life is good. You're ready for Valentine's Day as well?
Sure. It happens. Life in Seattle is freezing cold and wet.
Yeah, I knew the wet. I think the cold is underestimated. We all know the wet, but we don't really appreciate how cold it gets. So.
Oh, it can get cold. I don't know about New Hampshire, but our version of cold can be cold.
We could get there. We had a crappy winter, though. We got more wet than cold this year, so we really haven't... We haven't had a traditional New England winter just yet. So anyway, very interesting stuff. It snows in Seattle. It snows in New Hampshire. We've got that established. Now we can move on to the good stuff. So the stuff I'm interested in, I mean, you are a therapist, LMHC, I believe, is your credentials, so mental health counselor. Tell me, I'm always interested, and I always like to kick off with kind of the origin story. What drew you to this field? What got you kind of on the track of becoming a therapist, and how did you end up here, so to speak?
Not a straight line there. I did not practice or study psychology in my undergrad, and it wasn't something I dreamt about as a kid. My mom would love to think that I'm still going to be a great lawyer because I can argue back, which I thought was a very valid way to respond to her. But I actually tried to pursue it in a way. Didn't happen. Know that I love people and wanted to help people. Kind of took maybe a more macro view for a while. I was going to do public affairs policy work. And then in working through some youth organizations, I realized I really liked kids, didn't want to do teaching. So really just trying to find my place. And ultimately it has been people in my life who saw something in me and spoke that to me. And I took a chance with a lot of that. That's kind of throughout my story of somebody seeing something and me trying it on. And going into a master's degree for psychology was just that thing. It was my CrossFit coach of all people, who just listened to me while I was working out. And he said that I should apply for the master's program that he had just completed. And I did it. It was great. And it's literally been the most perfect fit since day one.
That's awesome. Isn't it crazy how looking back, all the things tend to connect in this perfect way. And at the time, you can feel lost, or you feel like nothing's happening, or feel like I haven't really found my place. And actually, you're on the way, to the place. You're perfectly positioned to have that experience and be inspired in that way. And what I did kind of the opposite. I did I did a health administration start, but then I got into psychology pretty quick and was psychology and counseling all the way through. What was it like walking into a graduate program as your like psych intro? Was that intimidating? Was that tough?
It was certainly intimidating. And I think that there's probably some gaps in like basic, I don't know, history of psychology. Like I know who Freud is, but I probably don't know him as in depth as if I had taken Psychology 101 or something in undergrad. So those things, sometimes I'd have to work a little harder to understand some of the material. But even as I'm saying it, I recognize that was kind of just a scenario I found myself in other instances too. Like younger in school, sometimes I wonder if I missed grammar because they took me out for ESL, even though I speak English clearly, but I wasn't I was one of the non-white individuals at the school. So they just had me in a different program and I had to catch up since.
Well, you might have got more Freud from the legal standpoint because he did a lot of cocaine and he lost multiple medical licenses and he really likes cigars. So you might have engaged him in a different context. So, well, that's interesting. So with kind of an unlimited kind of, menu, if you will, because when people say counseling and therapy, what people may or may not know is we get foundational knowledge in a lot of different techniques, but different programs tend to specialize in different approaches or different mindsets or, schema around that. So what were you drawn to in terms of a therapeutic approach, and what do you use now?
The school itself is very focused on story. So the school is the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. So you can get a master's in divinity there as well. But this intersection of text, soul, and culture is kind of the focus there. So it's listening to story, reading between the lines, understanding all the complexities that someone kind of brings through their words and where the words came from. And that was definitely the draw. I'd say even the interview process was watching a clip about like horse whispers. I forget what it is. And we had to basically like empathize or connect with this idea of like, even with lack of language, how do you see, how do you connect, how do you create the image of this being, animal in that example, or person. And I was really intrigued by that. Not something that I had been asked to do. I very much an academic and I love to think. So that opened up a whole separate space in my mind of having that kind of agency and control over something in your life, like your story.
That is interesting. And so, I guess I'll skip the good question, or I'll save it for later. I'll talk, kind of the most obvious question is, so when working with clients, you're talking about soul and you're talking about culture and using story to kind of access that. What does that work kind of look like? Because I don't work from that perspective. So I'm curious, like if I was having a session with you, what kind of work would we be doing? How would you be leading me? How would you be kind of guiding me through that process?
I share my emotional or something that stands out to me when a certain phrase or statement or word is used. So something that is more CBT, but I tend to use a lot is like cognitive distortions. So if they're catastrophizing a situation, let's unpack that. Why are you choosing to observe that situation in your life or right now in that way? If they say should, where does that expectation come from? Do you want to continue to hold that? Where has it been in the past, right? So really drawing that thread of like, it must have existed before and it's still showing up quickly, like reflexively in you talking about yourself, talking about your circumstances. So really unpacking language for a while. I'd say that's like the rapport of, I want to see how you talk and just kind of get a feel for that. And then in time, especially if there's like first order of change, if there's practical things we're trying to apply to a day-to-day, then we can go back and talk big story. When you look back at your life, do you really want to continue to tell that one part in this way? Or is that more redemptive at this point? Having the control of those pieces.
So I love it already. And Ian, you're going to have to clip this and send it to my wife, especially on the use of that word should, because we have energetic conversations around this concept of should.
Yeah.
Because the maybe it's the oppositional part of me or whatever it is, but I sort of challenge it all the time. Like should, well, who says should? As if there are these, stone tablets that have come down and like we just all say, and like that's the biblical truth or whatever. But it's like so much of when we just lapse into should, my personal thing with my wife has been like, no, there is no should. Like It's just you're putting that in there and sort of representing it as like a capital T truth, that kind of thing. So I'm in love with it. I'm in love with dissecting this use of the word should. So, yeah. And do people respond to that? I mean, what is your I don't want to say like your epiphany moments, but your breakthroughs or when you're making progress with clients? Is it where they get to a place of understanding where those patterns came from, when they get to a place where they can challenge them? Like, what's the goal in analyzing the speech?
I would say kind of this epiphany is when they take the reins. So I'd say like a pretty loose blueprint where I'm more curious as to like if that has value. And I do say this, I will caveat even with the should. There's a time and a place, right? There's a reason it is in our language. And we just want to pause for a moment or recognize, is that the best communication or use of what we're trying to say? So when they take the reins, when they're telling me, I love this way to work with my story. Like one example, an individual who works with music a lot, I'm going to butcher this as well, but there's some kind of like bracket that you put in music when you're going to come back to it. So like you're not quite there finding a rhythm and you like add this bracket around it. And we've done that in the story of, I'm not quite sure what to make of this time yet. Let's kind of bracket that and come back. And they took the reins. That's how they want to unpack their story. That's how they want to tell their story. So I'd say that is kind of like the aha moments for them when they're catching themselves. And maybe this is more of a therapist thing that they're like, and I wonder, what would Cassandra say? I hear that so often. It's kind of cool. Kind of what's like where you take someone's like a copyright thing, maybe, because I'm pretty sure like, oh, what would Jesus do is first.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what I'm thinking. That's what I hear echo when they say something like that. So yeah, definitely when they take agency over it, because that's the ultimate goal, right? Agency over your story, over your life. And I'm kind of there to help them be curious as to why they have the one they currently have.
You said something early on about when they're choosing to react to the situation that way. And I think that's really interesting because I know when I work with clients a lot of times, especially early on, there is this thought that there is no choice. Like I feel what I feel. Right. And it's just it's an automatic response. And, this person hurt me. So I feel angry. And there's no choice in that. They wronged me. And this is my response and how I feel. What do you mean choose how to respond? Or how do you mean choose how to feel? So how do you deal with that? Because I love what you're saying there, but I want you to unpack that a little bit for them.
With choice, and this one's a little newer to my work of like integrating more of like the nervous system work, but I try to work from the top down at that point. So not just staying in story. I love it. I value it. That's also very much in our head. So I recognize, okay, the story's coming probably from this emotional place first. So if there were comments said and things, the way they express themselves, trying to connect with the other side of it. Okay, then you might not have had choice in your feelings. That's valid, 100%. So let me connect there a little bit. What would you have liked to say? Starting to develop even the new muscle of that emotion doesn't have to be communicated in the one way. Maybe and then connecting really far back in the story. I know that this emotion is communicated in the one way because that's how I heard it, or that's what I've seen. So again, trying to rewrite it, choose for yourself what you would like to come from that emotion. So not just staying in the story head piece, but now connecting to, okay, when I feel anxious, when I feel angry, sad, I want these particular kinds of words to come out differently.
You may already know this guy, but if you look on Instagram and TikTok and things like that, there's a guy, Jefferson Davis, who is not a therapist. He's actually a lawyer, so you might like that. But he kind of fashions himself as like a communication coach, and especially teaching people how to deal with conflict. And so it's like, how do you deal with a passive aggressive person? How do you deal with somebody who's actively challenged you? How do you diffuse people's anger? He's got some great stuff, right? Like in terms of just techniques. But one thing he says repeatedly is, in those emotional moments, you have to remember, like, nobody can make me say anything I don't want to say, right? And so to just blurt or just give it out, you know what I mean? I love the ownership and empowerment that comes with that, because it's like, no, Cassandra didn't tick me off, and so I had to say that. Like, Cassandra ticked me off, and then I made the choice to respond in that following way, because I just love anything that puts a client back in control and back behind the wheel, so to speak, of their own experience. Interesting. So tell me, it's kind of backing up here a little bit, but oftentimes I see people who have had, early experiences or lifelong experiences, and that kind of feeds into their work. We're talking narrative, we're talking story. So I'm curious a little bit about backing up with you personally and talking about your story and the experiences that kind of help led you here as well.
If you were to speak to a 13-year-old self, she would certainly never have had the courage or confidence to be a counselor or a therapist. That I would say has informed initially the work around kids, I think is like an internal, really wanting to work with a young part of myself. I would say, I was thinking about this actually the other day. If we're thinking attachment styles, I think trauma, because of the experience and the outcome of it, probably starts really, really early. But I don't know if I want to name my own trauma that early, but it was early enough. And this idea of like trying to find my identity in what people saw. So which as I'm saying this, I'll start to unpack it too, because I haven't had the language for it. But I think as a counselor, something that I do of like trying to help people find within themselves what's already there, maybe is my own take on what I imagine people were doing with me. I think at times I was misled, but I was also trying so hard to find where I fit and who I was that I just took it on. I will say to clients sometimes, especially with like ACT therapy, you are these my values? I should live into them. I'm going to try them on is kind of what I say. You try them on, you can take it back off. You're not attached to them by any means. But early on, I'd say it really started with this idea of, like I mentioned earlier, being in a predominantly white community and being the only blended Latina young girl. I was looking around and people had money. Okay, I don't fit with money, so I don't know how to communicate or be there. Or people had 2 parents in the home, so I don't really understand how to be in that space. I don't know how to fit in there. And then the categories that did start to come up of, okay, I see where people can be seen, and it would be like beauty, or mostly beauty first. So this desire to be noticed or seen kind of came up at first with a very early developed eating disorder that was a long time of struggle, and then in the midst more spaces. So in the midst of that, okay, now being beautiful, and then in that space being seen for something else, and then trying that, and then pulled to something else and trying that. So really it was just trying to find my identity and what people were seeing in me, which got me to this space. So there's good in it, but there was also a lot of challenges in it.
Being a kid is really hard. It's
really hard.
It's just
it's so hard.
You have no money, you have no power. You in many homes, you don't have a voice, and yet you have this inner turmoil where you're like, where do I fit? Who am I? What feels good? What is good? And also this massive anxious pressure hanging over your head of like, and you're constantly reminded that you're going to grow up and you're going to get real responsibilities, and then life gets really hard, and you're in the easy part of your life right now, and you're like, Jesus, what do I do with all that at 11? God. Sadly, I hear your versions of your story a lot, and you probably do with the kids that you work with as well too. So how early were you kind of first aware of that turmoil? I mean, because we have this as adults, we look back on children and we're almost jealous. Like, you don't have any responsibilities, you get to play and it's idyllic, and you're like, no, there's a lot going on. But when did you start feeling that, like, I'm struggling here, or, I'm just not fitting, like, where were you aware of it?
Honestly, like really, really young. I was probably, I'm going to say like 5 or 6. It was all too soon that there was always this pressure, similar to my mom saying that I was a lawyer because I had an attitude. I was a kid. I had tantrums. Does that mean I'm going to be a good lawyer? I don't know. But I took that on thinking like, okay, this is someone speaking my identity to me. But as early as 5 and 6, it was just this pressure. I mean, as first generation, they are saying, we're fighting this fight for you to be something better in this country. And I'm 5 and 6, you're going to college. Okay. Like just these pressures that you cannot comprehend. And within my unit, my oldest sister, being an oldest child, she assumed that role well, and she has always been successful. So here I am thinking like, okay, maybe this doesn't fit. Oh, but she's doing it just fine. So I must be able to follow suit. And that was very young. And similarly, I mean, as far as models go, she also had her own struggles around body and image. And so to see her around certain behaviors and thought processes, I thought that that was the right way, because I'm just looking. To have been told these expectations and pressures from such a young age was really hard to understand.
And I would imagine with ethnicity and the cultural issues as well, the concept of beauty may mean different things in different cultures, right? So you're in a predominantly white community, and so not only you're adopting this concept of beauty as a way to be seen, but you're adopting it in a predominantly white context, which may or may not match, for you, So did you feel like you lost yourself a little bit there, like trying to change, trying to be more white? I mean, was that kind of like part of it? Like,
Yeah,
I've got to mirror what I see around me and find that to fit. And how did that hit you?
kind of interesting. Because I had seen that with some people a little later on in high school. And I was in this like very odd in between space of people valuing the difference when it came to beauty. So something of the dark hair was nice. So I never tried to bleach my hair. Being able to speak the language was like awed over, but just not to too much of an extent. So I tried to live further into my color, tanned more, like I tan amazing. And here are these other individuals trying to tan themselves and turning odd colors, and I'm getting this like beautiful olive color going on. So I try to lean that way, but so much of me was in the white culture as I'm like trying to falsify this other half of myself, because I wasn't like a proud Latina. Like I didn't walk around in like my traditional clothing or garments. It was just seeing what they were okay seeing and then just glorifying those parts of myself.
Gotcha. So you had to find that balance. And by the way, reminding everybody who's listening, this is like at 8 years old, right? So
yes,
right.
Young.
Yeah, so you're thinking playing like kickball and swinging on the monkey bars, and like we're talking about inner turmoil and wrestling with identity. But so it's almost like, how different can I be? Where's that line of like the difference is being celebrated? But if I immersed myself too far in it in the traditional sense, maybe there was a level of rejection. They're like, nope, no, too different. Can't really accept that, right? I like the tan. I like the dark hair. I don't need all that other stuff. You know what I mean? And so you have to kind of make trade-offs as far as what you keep and, what you promote. And you had mentioned too, like as far as like the inner, trauma being like a long-standing thing. And obviously with the eating disorder, there's a lot of trauma that goes along with just having an eating disorder. But do you think the source of the original kind of trauma and discontent came from that disconnect from your community, not finding where you fit? I mean, were there other sort of like dramatic events, or was it just kind of a combination? I'm just curious as to like, because I think if parents listen and they go like, well, I'm scared of my children having an eating disorder. I'm scared of them being hurt. But is this like hurt from living, or is this hurt from events that happen when living? Like, where did you sort of cross that line from difficulty to disorder?
I certainly, in my understanding, think that my traumas as a foundation were very much generational traumas. So the like one event for myself doesn't quite stand out. I mean, my parents were divorced when I was 3, so little things that I could assume maybe created this big rupture for me internally, but also to know like my lived experience with things that were brought to my attention, this focus on body and perfection and striving and productivity. I think to have that kind of pressure because of generational trauma, because that was the language and the perspective my mom was able to have with me, I think that didn't give any space for like a non-anxious trauma responding young child.
What's it like?
It's a best friend. There's often in the work with eating disorders, they identify the internal voice that is your eating disorder as ED, eating disorder. So I mean, you can give your own character, but that is it's like a person. It's something that you can depend on. It's a part of you. So early on, to not identify and know between me and this internal voice, I was doing just fine. I could check all the boxes. I could restrict when I thought or when they thought to tell me to. I could binge and purge whenever they said to. So it was like, that's where I fit in. That's where it made sense. And there wasn't any leaving. There wasn't, I mean, I guess I could be rejected, but I guess there's this weird understanding of like, I would reject myself. I can't really be rejected, but It was a long time. It was probably about 10 years of very active eating disorders, kind of ebbing and flowing between anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating. And then somebody noticed that I could need some help, and in a very kind way, gave me some pamphlets of what could be covered by certain insurances. And it was just the right thing at the right time from the right person for me to say, okay, I can give this a shot. But that's treatment. And that was 10 years worth of active addiction for an eating disorder, amongst other addictions. And then the recovery for an eating disorder is every single day. I mean, you face food every day. I think they kind of talk about that. Like, you can abstain from alcohol or keep away from certain people and other addictions. But then if you have an eating disorder, you have to have that conversation with yourself multiple times a day, every single day, of what you'd like to do different.
Before we go on, I want to say a few words about Anew Behavioral Health. Anew Behavioral Health is an outpatient provider of mental health and substance abuse services in Ohio and New Hampshire. That means that Anew can successfully treat mental health and substance abuse issues or dual diagnosis if you're struggling with both. Their integrated approach allows for them to successfully address issues related to anxiety, depression, addiction, trauma, and really anything that stands between your life and the life you could be living. You really cannot bring them an issue that they have not successfully treated. They have also solved one of the biggest problems for people seeking help. They have a dedicated team waiting to hear from you at helpnow@anewbh.com. If you contact them today, within 24 hours, you will have heard back from, wait for this, a real live person, and will also have your first appointment scheduled at that time. So how do you contact them? Well, if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, you're probably close to one of their local locations. You're welcome to go in. If not, you can always reach them online at anewbh.com. And if you're interested in services for you or a loved one, use that address, helpnow@anewbh.com. Of all people, Ben Affleck recently talking about his addiction. And he said the hard thing about it is if you win 1,000 times and you lose once, you've lost, right? And so I think a lot about what you're saying about being encountered with food, 3, 4, 5 times a day, even if you're not really food centric, once or twice a day, and you have to win every single time, or you're into a lapse or a relapse. Yeah, I don't know. We met 5 minutes ago. I just feel sad for that 10 years for you. I feel that, because it wasn't like, now it was, again, informative years. I assume this is, how young were you when you guess you first became disordered or first engaged in disordered eating?
I'd say 12 and a half, 13.
So like all the formative years, like 12 to 22.
Yeah. Yep. I was like a senior in college when I went to treatment.
So and I assume you're getting grades, you had graduated high school, you're doing stuff. I mean, you were productive. I'm getting a sense from you that you're an achiever and you were probably checking boxes, right? And from the outside looking in, people maybe were very happy with you. You talked about different forms of eating disorders. So how did it start for you? Just not eating? Or did you, what were you doing to kind of like ease into that world?
Yeah, there was a friend of mine, because kids should not be left unsupervised, especially in middle school, right? So 12, 13, it's just a bad time. But there was a friend who had mentioned that she was making herself throw up. And again, as I was trying to figure out what's what and what's right, what's wrong, and who's who, I tried it. And in whatever climate was happening in my life and in my mind, it was just it. This would be the first time I'd try to do this, but I wouldn't want to compare it to other substances in the ways that like there's kind of a chase for something, because I don't remember it to feel as similarly as like a high. It was almost like a posturing. It was like a full-time different title. I didn't have to even chase it. It was kind of like, even as I was thinking about it, I was already there. Whereas like with the substance, you kind of have to get it to get the high, but something of like, I can do this and I can do it whenever I want kind of thing felt very powerful. So it started off with some purging, and then you start to get all the praise for losing weight and everyone wants to know. And so you have to continue on what you're doing. So then I almost completely stopped eating. And then within a year or two, it became very worrisome. And people wanted to feed me. They would bring me grapefruits and lunch or something. And it was like, no, now I'm stuck. At that point, that was the hardest, I'd say, when you're not eating at all, was really hard to come back from, because you couldn't reason with why food had any value. So my way personally of seeing myself out of that was then to binge and purge. So I would eat anything and everything in sight, keep people off my back, still doing the thing. And then I would just find the space that I could go and get rid of all of it.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a very naive question, but again, as somebody who hasn't experienced it, I mean, were you just hungry all the time? Were you in pain because of it? Like, you actually sound, it kind of sounds like it actually, like you kind of had that level of control. So I'm just curious as to the actual physical experience.
So not hungry. And I now more so in this field, I do like to work with individuals with eating disorders, although I think it best is like supported with a team. But when you're at a certain point in your treatment, or if you have other team members that kind of collaboratively work together. But I know now that you desensitize your physical response. So I'm going to butcher this, not vestibular, maybe proprioceptive sense of my body's giving me cues and I have responses to them. And you actually sever that to say, I don't respond to hunger. And that cuts off those responses to other physical cues as well. So pain and other things can also be very blurry in your understanding or felt sense of them and what to do with it. So I don't remember feeling hungry. I remember the urgency when my mind would say, we are binging. Like, I need to get all of this. That I remember, this like franticness, but I don't remember being hungry. It wasn't led by that. It was led by some other drive.
You had mentioned at the end that somebody did a very good thing in terms of like reaching out to you in the right way at the right time. Before we talk about that, what do people, because I'm sure parents listening to this, or even maybe people dealing with this, are making some mistakes. So from your experience and from your training, what do people get wrong about loving somebody with an eating disorder, or about managing their own eating disorder? Like, what are the common mistakes out there?
100% don't mention their body. Don't talk about their weight. If the concern is something, make it even more objective, like being secretive, or they're really tired. Just things that doesn't focus on this one thing that they're battling with consistently, where some eating disorders can be driven by something a little more than body, but that tends to be it. So control is obviously a huge one in there. But yeah, don't talk about their body. Don't try to feed them. There's a lot of, to a certain point, when they are so malnourished, it has to be a hospitalization. It has to be a force feed. So with the understanding of, hopefully you will notice before it gets to that point. And that's one of the hardest points to come back from. And I think the death rate for eating disorders is pretty high up there as far as addictions. The climate that I was in was this individual allowing me to be in their home with the circumstances I was in. I was staying at their house for a good amount of time, and I was also a pretty active alcoholic at the same time, and they just let me be. I think they almost like wanted to see. That's how I took it, of like wanting to see what is the extent of what she's going through. Never interjected, not really too many boundaries. They really just kind of gave me that space to like, you can be who you are here. And then I just remember sitting down one morning and they had like 4 pamphlets to treatment centers. And she said, I already looked up what your insurance will cover. It could be this out of pocket. I understand you're in college. You might have to go between classes, blah, blah, blah. And I think it'd be good for you.
And this as a therapist too, there's so many times that you remember the Chinese finger cuffs, right? Like the things you put on, and like as you pull, they get tighter, But if you kind of move together, they loosen up, and then things can go. I just see a lot of that in that approach of just like, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to accept you. I'm just going to allow you, right? I'm not going to be constantly like, eat something, checking on you. Let's go to the scale. Let's run to the hospital. It's like pull, because there's that natural pursuer distancer thing. And as I pursue, you're going to distance, right? So you're going to pull away, which tightens the bind, But to just sort of sit with you and to be with you and accept you and love you, which is all the things you were looking for at the beginning of this crazy journey, right? I mean, self-acceptance and self-love, and interesting. Do you think, this is kind of a sort of semantic kind of deal, but you talked a lot about the community you grew up in and, being a person of color and the challenges there. And you also kind of hinted at some of the stuff going on in your family. Do you think, it's sort of a chicken or the egg kind of deal. Was it the family dynamics that you think actually drove you to addiction and disorder eating? Or do you think it was like a lack of community support, a lack of understanding, cultural differences? I mean, maybe a little bit of both. I don't know. Would you put percentages on that in terms of what, led to your condition?
Percentages. I would say maybe like 70% home and 30% community.
Because I find that very comforting, right? Because for people listening, like even if you're in a difficult situation, there are things that can be done in the immediate family to help offset that and provide support. Yeah.
One of my therapists more recently, I loved that she gave me this perspective because I had not thought of it, but she was saying that often like immigrant parents focus so much on academics and grades because that is the most translatable language from their experience in their life here, because everything else is different. And I think that something else that she didn't mention is also this idea of beauty and body. I mean, beauty can look different, but there in the Latino culture, there's this they're still selling all of those infomercial pills and people buy it every day all the time. And it's flourishing over there. And here it's like more quiet, but it's still there in the background. It's so embedded in our culture to always be on a diet, but it's for your best interest, or to intermittent fast, but it's in your best, like all these things where you're trying to understand where in there does it say that my body's okay. And I think because my mom had to translate her version of her language around body to something to focus on here, it was very blunt. It was like, that doesn't look right, or do this, or you should stop eating this, or American fast food sucks, but here's fast food. Like it was just horrible. It was a lot of mixed messages and her doing the best she could. Like I understand that that's her trauma and she was communicating what she maybe could bring with her. And it was just miscommunicated.
American fast food does suck. Is she is she that critical in her voice? I mean, is it a direct transfer? Like when it's still mom with you kind of?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, my work she is not.
You're right. Right.
But when I'm with her, that voice that I had internalized for so long is exactly the same.
Interesting.
So all these years, she has the same take, the same voice.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out, I've never met your mom, but I will say, like people, it's so easy to kind of vilify the parent, right? And I think that it's probably a fair assumption that all of those things that created that critical inner voice came from love. She wanted to help. She wanted you to feel beautiful. She wanted you to be happy. She brought you here for a reason, that kind of thing. But you said that mistranslation is where things really went screwy. And people can do bad things with good intentions and vice versa. So, I don't know. I think it's important that listeners, because it's just so easy to go like, oh, bad mom. And I don't think bad mom. I think, well-intentioned mom may be bad execution, right? Not understanding the long-term impact. Is that how you feel too? Have you gotten to a good place with mom? Do you guys have a relationship
We are around each other sometimes. I think I'm trying to tie it back to our comment about, having this like impulsive reaction around emotion. The beauty of being in the space that we might find ourselves is wanting to think differently about that. So, okay, I can be angry and I can come from a place of love and you didn't get the right message. So let's work on that. So I'm thinking like rupture, repair, the beauty of relationship, it's going to happen. And it's not so if anything, it's not to make the one individual bad, it's that the relationship is not good. So she has a lot of potential if she wanted to do relationship work. She doesn't want to do relationship work. So then it's on me to take control of what's best in my interest. I can observe what she did the best she can, but if she doesn't want to take that next step also, then our relationship is just not well.
You sound like her mom. You sound like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
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 And was that a little bit of that going on too growing up? Did you felt like you had to kind of co-parent? Did you felt like it was more peer-to-peer than mom to daughter sometimes as well? Or is that through your process and your growth that you've kind of come to that place?
I don't think I parented her much. I think I parented my younger sister. And I think I took from her examples of what it was like to be a parent at a very young age. But my perspective at that point was not a very sound one. So I think she still wasn't modeled to parent as a parent for me. And then I tried to do that with a younger one, but something just felt so wrong in my experience there that as I've grown up, I've really tried to make more sense of of what I could do different.
I'm wondering if that wasn't protective of your younger sister, right? Like, I've gone through this and I've been damaged, and so I'm going to try to translate better for you so that maybe you don't have those same experiences. What is recovery like when you've got multiple issues, right? You've mentioned alcoholism. And you've mentioned the eating disorders, which, by the way, I want to like appreciate you and acknowledge your candor and your honesty. Like, one of my favorite things about this podcast is I get to meet a lot of helpers that are also humans, and they just are honest about like, hey, you know, sometimes you sit in a therapist office and you wear a certain clothing and you seem a certain way, and your clients come to you and they almost kind of, sometimes it's like the guru, right? Like, you've got all the answers and you're perfect. You can certainly help me. And it's like, we're so not that, you know what I mean? So I just want to express appreciation to you for being honest about that. Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's courageous. But what is that dual recovery like? I mean, is it sort of the same principles applied twice, or are they very different for you?
For my experience, it's a pretty messy recovery, because with eating disorders, a lot of the work is to stop seeing things in black and white. So this food is not good. It is not bad. This food is food. This food is nourishing. You know, finding all those in between spaces. That kind of perspective, I would say, drew out my other addictions in longer than they needed to be, because if I have this many drinks, I am not bad. This is not bad. I am not under this shadow of shame. And then I was almost like trying to fit the gray into some of my other active addictions, as well as probably not wanting to really let go of all of these crutches or like support systems, identities, ways to be like included and involved. For sure, the eating disorder one has been, I'd say, like lockdown the best. As far as not wanting to see the gray and other things, I mean, to have shifted from alcoholism, it wasn't that I stopped drinking. It was that I had to try to find the right perspective with drinking that wasn't this like very loose gray that worked really well with my eating disorder. Needed to see a little more rigidity and boundaries and understand my relationship to it. So that one's, I'd say, the longest working one would be something like alcohol, but the other ones were a little quicker to cut.
That's a great way of putting that, because I worked with addicts for a long time, still do, and it's true, because you can rationalize almost anything as good or bad within your addiction. And that's actually one of the features of an active addiction, is that, you know, everybody else is looking at it and going like, whoa, there's a problem here. And you're like, no, it's just this. It's just, I'm just grabbing a drink after work. I'm just blowing off some steam. I'm just, you know, those are light examples. But that's interesting. That's interesting that they take different skills to kind of, I don't want to say control, because that's also kind of a messy concept around addiction, but, you know, to empower yourself, you actually have to apply different skills. So it's not the same thing twice. It's a very different process. You know, a lot of times with addiction, they talk about with, you know, turning the volume up and turning the volume down, right? So like addiction has this dual purpose of, especially drug abuse, it'll turn the volume up on the things that you do like, and it'll turn the volume down on the things that you don't like. Did you see any of that with your eating disorder as well, or was that scratching a different itch, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I gave up certain hobbies. I loved softball. I loved soccer. I physically didn't have the capability to keep up with some of those things. So that definitely turned the volume way down on those interests. Making time and space for creativity was pretty much completely gone until maybe later in high school with certain substances. There was creativity that came back, but not in the best. It just happened. It wasn't like I was turning the volume back up on a part of myself that I valued. It was definitely to go back into the master's program, or to go into the master's program after CrossFit. To start this podcast, I initially had said the other day that it was wanting to try something different or push myself out of my comfort zone, because I have found favor in those spaces when maybe there's like kind of a reaction of like, I don't want to show up, or I don't think that's important. But that was the same. My sister asked me to do a Groupon for CrossFit. And at the time I hadn't found how physically to kind of include my body in my recovery yet. I was actually kind of afraid, because there is this fear of, am I going to like go into a calorie deficit? Am I going to get over obsessive? Like, can I move my body and it be healthy? I didn't really know. So that was like reintroducing this, turning the volume back up on, I love to feel strong. I do love my body. I think ultimately I loved myself and my body and was trying to figure out where it fits. So that definitely turned back on. Academics, I've always been academic, and throughout it all, somehow that was one of the loudest parts of myself. It also kept me under the radar of people being concerned at all. If my life can look really nice up front, you have no question or doubt about what's going on behind the scenes.
Hiding in plain sight is often the most effective, strategy, so. I love what you're saying about the working out too. So as parents, I have a daughter, right? So my wife and I, we focus a lot on, we think we're doing the right thing, focusing a lot preventatively on feeling healthy, right? We don't ever talk about a number. And then what your body can do. So function and health, right? Does it feel good? Do you feel healthy? It's not like this is a good choice or a bad choice. It's like, the raspberries are healthy. They feed your body. And the candy, it's fun, but it doesn't really give your body much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you find that to be an effective approach, or, is that sort of, because I'm sure people listening to this going like, okay, I've got concerns about my daughter or my son, and, I want to be preventative and proactive. Is that a good proactive strategy, or what would you recommend?
I think as much as it is giving examples and speaking about it is so much the modeling. I think the recent perspective that made so much sense to me for like young kids, when they throw a tantrum about not getting the toy, their life is so limited at that point that that is a big deal. That is that big of a deal. And we don't have to tell them it's not a big deal. You have to see it this way. Like, they're still feeling it. So we just model like, okay, when I'm in that space, what do? I don't know, I'll just lay next to them. Let's feel this out. So as much as we want to give language it kind of comes in time almost. If it's direct, I'd say for kids, it is a lot of, when they play, they're talking. When they interact with you, they're talking more than us talking. So when we do talk, I think it's kind of like that 5-6-year-old version of myself of like trying to take in all this language when I'm not there yet either. And I'm still just trying to like see the world, understand the world in a different way. So at a young enough age, I would say it's just examples of what you eat, and you kind of dialoguing about your food. Like, man, I wasn't that hungry, but I know it's noon, so I'm going to make sure to eat some yogurt, and then we'll see how I feel in a couple hours. Things like that, not saying to them like that is what you could do or what you should do, but just being really open about, this is my process, this is what I do. I had a hard day, I'm going to go on a walk, and not even necessarily inviting them, but just like letting them know what happens internally for you at a young enough age. I'd say a little later, the invites can be nice, right? Like, this is what I've done to strengthen this part of my body. I like this workout. Try it on.
And you're doing that crazy CrossFit stuff. So, you've got a lot to share there. So it's very intimidating.
I love it.
It's so good. It's so cool. But like, you watch it, it's kind of intimidating. So, no, but to go back to your point, listen, for children, behavior is communication. That's what people don't understand. And so the throwing a fit child, it's the parent tends to lock onto what they're doing, right? You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be acting like that. And I think you have to interject in between there and like, what is he saying to me with this, right? Like, and it's absurd when he's on his face in the grocery store kicking the freezer case. It's so absurd to sit there and go, what's he trying to say to me right now? But, if you come from that context of, again, no power, no money, no resources, no nothing, and now on top of that, you have that verbal limitation, those connections are not even open yet. So what is he saying? Maybe he's saying, I'm frustrated, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm feeling disappointed, whatever. That I think parents can kind of deal with. I can deal with a child who comes up, if he walked up to you and said, hey, Dad, I'm feeling a little disappointed right now and I need your help. You could interact with that effectively as a parent. If they took something and threw it at your head across the room, you don't interact well with that, but they're saying the same thing, right? They just don't have the verbal. So I think it's important I love what you said there. It's important to keep that context in place. I want to change gears here really quickly because, and this is like the big mistake that white people love to make, is I want to make you the representative for the entire brown community, right? So
it's inevitable.
But, immigration is a huge deal right now, right? And there's a lot of that in the news, and people are talking about that. And not just white people, but people in general are just really, concerned and feeling, frustrated about how to feel about that. But there's also X amount of million people that are kind of in your situation where they're integrating into new communities. Again, I'm not making you the voice for the entire people, but from your experience, what did your community get right and wrong? And what do you hope that these new communities with this new integration can get right, going forward?
Well, the biggest thing that I can only observe to be so different, so I can't speak like
Yeah,
as
yeah.
truly to now, is that there wasn't this, like, I wasn't bad in the eyes of my community. You know, I wasn't robbing resources. I never got the feel of, which I do know some, and actually later in my life, because of probably all of this like polarizing opinions and whatnot, is when I experienced people like speaking ill of me as a person because of my color. And that happened in my late 20s. So that was new. But as a kid, I didn't feel that I was bad. I just felt that they didn't know what to do. Like they didn't know how, almost like I was trying to fit in. They didn't know how to fit me in. I don't know what their side was. I never asked anyone, but it's like they didn't really know how or where I would fit. So the thing that they probably did wrong was to not be curious. And I do think now, as I've seen, so my younger sister, 13 years younger, she went to the same elementary school as I did. And when I saw her yearbook, it was like 60 mixed brown and 40 white in the same area. And they would have a little bit more like cultural awareness, whether it was not just putting up posters and banners for 4th of July, if that even happens in summer, but like other events of like Dia de los Muertos or something. And that happened maybe in high school. I know with like a lot of people taking Spanish classes, you'd see more of the culture like throughout the halls in some way. So I would say just a curiosity of who are you and how can you also exist here as opposed to get out.
That thing you mentioned is Day of the Dead, right?
Yeah.
Are you impressed by my cultural sensitivity to that? Yeah. I spent a lot of time in Texas, you know, so yeah.
Fair, yeah.
There you go. What I'm struck by what you're saying about that, remaining curious, where do you fit? What feels comfortable? I mean, these are things that all children are struggling with, right? And so it's so funny because it really isn't a different or new skill set. It's just, it's human. It's allowing people to be human, have their human experiences, and then how does that fit and integrate, and how are you feeling in terms of that integration? Because again, if like, you know, from your perspective, it was 70-30, 70-30 as far as family and generational trauma, and then there was that influence of the community. And so while the 70 is bigger, 30 is significant, you know, and if it was a more welcoming environment, you know, different outcomes for sure. So how has yours, you know, we talked kind of tying this back together in terms of narrative therapy and changing stories. How has your story changed having gone through all this? I mean, what was your story then and what is your story now?
I would say that in like high school, college, I was confidently the victim. Like life has happened to me. These are my circumstances, the hand I was dealt, doing the best I can. And it probably fueled some of the other addictions of, you know, I'm doing the best I can. I kind of need this. Later and more so now, I kind of just see the very young version of myself having a lot of needs that were unmet and not placing it on like any circumstance or person for them to not have been met, but doing the best that I could to try to find out how to meet them. So it is more of, I don't want to quite say redemptive. If anything, it's just who I am now and who I was then. I think the most common thread throughout is that I'm a very curious person. So just the questioning of things, which in middle school, the things that people called out, I got an award, which I might have kept. I keep a lot of random things, but it's the best questioner from my social studies teacher, Miss Rusk, if she's ever listening. But she called me best questioner. And at first, at the time, again, victim, I'm like, she had nothing else to say about me. Like, that's so dumb. Like, who's best questioner? That's so ridiculous.
So you questioned your questioner award?
I did. And now as an adult, I'm like, that is so, like, that's just who I was. You know, I don't see myself so much as a victim. I was just lost and confused, and I was trying to figure out where I could be met.
If I hear you right, is your progress now and your evolution now almost changing your experience of the past? Because I know you went through it and you experienced it the first time, but now it sounds like in retrospect, you feel differently about it. So there's actually repair that's happening across time.
Yeah, I think I had mentioned posturing earlier in regards to like with the eating disorder, just kind of feeling this like big ego. Before, when I think of the past, like I could physically kind of feel this like small, almost like crumbling, you know, maybe even not even wanting to go there. Like your mention of some people don't talk about these things. If I were to just think of it in I'm a victim and I'm still under that shadow, why would I want to shed light to that? Because there isn't light there. But now I know there's light there. I'm trying to see it differently, even just how I want to talk about it, like physically opening up my body a little bit of it doesn't feel the same. I'm not holding on to like a scared young girl as much as I am doing the best I can and doing a pretty good job at it.
Yeah, I mean the resume's impressive, and you're doing pull-ups like 10 and 20 at a time. So like, there's
okay.
Close enough.
Yeah.
So no, but I think that's an important point, because where I see clients and even myself in times in my life where you get into a place of real distress is where you feel like this is what it's going to be like forever, right? It's not going to change. This is either who I am forever, this is how life is forever, and I'm essentially doomed. It's a life sentence. But that's not been my experience. My experience is actually that things change quite a bit, and people need to keep that in mind, because not only does it change in the present, again, your feelings about the past change along with it. And so it's really not forever, right? Even though you lived it and that day is gone, your recollection of and your experience of and how you classify that and then therefore move forward in your life, it's changed, and so I don't know. I think you're not saying it in that exact way, but what I take from that is that it's important to not get into that place of feeling like this is how it's going to be forever. You are capable of changing. Things can feel differently. And so, I mean, hang in there, right? I mean, it's, keep working. Obviously, I'm picking up a lot of stuff as far as like therapy, personal stuff in terms of personal investment, things like that. But for other people looking to make that change and looking to change their story, what were the key components that allowed you to change that story? We've heard how it changed. How'd you get there?
The intro to my school too. The founder of the school's name is Dan Allender, and he wrote a book, A Story to Be Told. So really that was kind of it. The school, again, theology, psychology. So there is more of like a religious focus. They try to just make it a part of, but not about it. But just this idea of like our story has already been written. If you're thinking biblically, then you try to see it from the perspective of there's favor in your story. It wasn't to be written as a failure. So how do you go back through and start to see those glimmers, or where you were taken care of, or who took care of you? So that's, I'd say, in the process, because it was really unpacking skeletons. My program, my master's, was like, you will not be seen. They will see you, and they will see all of you, and they will have you see yourself in a group. It was great. I mean, I was ready for that at the point of my life that I was at. So that was really helpful to have people supporting me, almost like just in proximity, not necessarily like giving me things, but just being there while I started to explore this difference of like, how else can I observe my life? Almost, I guess, in the setting of like, and I'm here. So maybe I should take a pause and recognize that something could have gone right down the line.
We're getting close on time, but I am curious for either for yourself or for other people. So that's college you kind of encountering it at the same time. If 12-year-old you is listening to this, or there are other people who are listening to this, I recognize things are off track. I recognize I'm not feeling the way I want to. I want to change my story. I just don't know where to begin or how to begin. I mean, do any messaging for them or thoughts for them or thoughts for you back at that time?
I wish that this was a more accessible answer. And what comes to mind is for someone else to help you see the parts that are hard for you to see. So whether that's a mentor, it could be a mentor, anybody that you look up to, any person, any teacher who has given you that award that you're like, I don't know, like the parts of you that maybe are more like your shadow, or you're not quite sure because you're only seeing the bad. Kind of trying to take in, again, for better or worse, for myself, there was these moments where maybe what people were saying they saw or who they wanted me to be wasn't in my best interest. And there was a lot of times that it was my blind spot, and I needed to hear it from someone on the outside. Because we know reflexively, I will say, do I know who and when that developed at some point in time that I've internalized it as my own? So we need that other person. And I say it's limited resources. Not everyone can be in counseling, but those people can exist in your life. It could be that friend that you kind of don't like to hang out with because they want something different for you than this life that you're having turmoil in. Do you lean into that? Do you at least give them enough of your time and space and wondering of like, what do you want from me, or what do you see? It could be a parent for the kid. That'd be hard to hear, but the parent who is trying to communicate through the language of like, I want your best interest and I don't know what to do, which is also very powerful. I don't know what to do. Can we do this together? Like empowering the other. but I do think it takes the other. I think in getting to the point of doing it on your own is because you've already worked with others.
I mean, we all need mirrors. I mean, that's kind of what therapy is, right? I mean, I used to joke about, there's really not much more I'm going to give you except I'm going to hold the mirror and you're going to look at it. And when you get really uncomfortable, I'm going to very gently and quietly move the mirror over to where you're looking now. You know what I mean? And so I think our role in that is being open to that experience, right? And even if you are 10 or 11, 12 years old, you may not have the verbal acuity to go like, hey, I need some outside perspective. Can you give me some feedback? But you can be looking for it yourself and recognizing and understanding that the you that you see of yourself is not the only you that's out there. There's how Ian is receiving me and how Cassandra is receiving me and how my wife is receiving me, right? And those all have things to share about what's real of me, right? Yes, how I see myself is maybe the more intimate view, but it's also biased because sometimes I'm not a big fan of me, right? And so it can be biased negatively, or some people can be overly biased positively. So just being open and understanding that there are other pieces and other interpretations out there, I think is a huge point. And I thank you for making that. So, Cassandra, this has been great. I wish we had like 6 hours. This is awesome. You were so good at this. Have you podcasted much? Is this new for you?
I've never podcasted, but I probably listen to at least a podcast a day.
Well, now you have yours to listen to, and I will tell you objectively, it's really good. It's really good, Cassandra. You're good at this. How do people find you? Do you want to be found? Like, are you on social? Like, how do people connect with you?
My social medias are a personal one, so not. But I do have my website. I have a waiting list if somebody wants to do the work. There are limitations across states, but I guess for their own search of narrative work. But my website is refiningthenarrative.net, and from there they can contact me if they wanted to reach out. There's email and a work number and whatnot.
Very good. And limitations across state, do they have to be in your state for you to work with them?
So I just took a training.
Okay.
The limitations are that some states, Washington will allow us to work with any state that allows. So as long as the other state approves, Washington approves. So if I ask another state if I can, which I hear California is the most rigid, some of them have completely shut the door, but they are right now in the works, to be hopeful, to allow for LMHCs to be able to serve across the country without these limitations. So I forget what that group is called, but they're working on that right now.
Well, whatever it is, I want to give them my time and my money. That's an issue I'm very passionate about. If you're a therapist in Washington, you're a therapist in the entire country. There's no difference. It's bureaucratic nonsense. Not that I'm trying to like rage against the machine, but there is nothing to filing your paperwork in Massachusetts that changes anything about your training or your experience. It's just unnecessary steps. And I will get a little political with all those politicians who are kind of like stumping right now in election year saying we need more mental health, we need more support, we need more addiction resources. Then remove the damn barriers to care. That's one of them. National certification, national licensure should have happened yesterday. We joked about telehealth. Telehealth should have happened 20 years ago. It shouldn't have taken a pandemic. National certification should happen yesterday. Get it done, whatever needs to happen. Anu stands with it. Jason stands with it. Cassandra stands with it. I mean, it's just silly. But the point for you personally is if people are interested in what you're saying, they should reach out to you because even if they're not in your state, it may work out and you can work with them on figuring that out. So yeah, awesome. Great. Did you have a good time?
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, you're really good at it. So, all right, we're going to part ways, but thank you, Cassandra. I appreciate your honesty and your candor and an amazing journey. I look forward to reading your book someday.
I think about it sometimes. We'll see.
Think about it a lot. I think you've got a good story to tell. So, and you can be in the front, like in your therapy stuff, and in your back flexing after CrossFit, like it show the two sides. It'd be good.
Yeah, I like that. I'll think of the image first, and then I'll write the book.
There you go. That'll inspire you to actually make it come to life if you can see it in reality. So That's awesome. So yeah, appreciate you, Ian, as always. Producer Ian was here. That's why I had a smooth ride. So thank you so much, sir. Good luck at the Valentine comedy show. You'll have some laughs, if nothing else. And to all you guys out there with Valentine's Day, expressing our love for you. Listen, you take the time to watch this show. I think it's incredibly valuable. We've met some amazing people like Cassandra, but time is your most valuable asset. And so choosing to spend that with us is appreciated, and we love you for it. And I hope you love the content you receive. So with that said, until next time, take care of yourself, love yourself, and love each other. Thanks. Hey guys, although Through Help and Back is an excellent podcast with a lot of great ideas, I do want to let you know that in no way is Through Help and Back expected to be perceived as or relied upon in any way as specific medical advice or mental health advice for you personally. The information provided through Help and Back on our website or our podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment that can be provided by your own providers. Do not use our content in lieu of professional advice given by qualified medical professionals, and do not disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking professional advice because of the information you have read on our website, heard on our podcast, or otherwise received from us. Although we love discussing issues related to healthcare, mental health, and addiction, we are not providing direct healthcare, mental health care, medical, or nutrition therapy services. We're not attempting to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure in any manner whatsoever any physical or psychological ailment, any mental or emotional issue, disease, or condition. We are not giving you specific medical, psychological, or religious advice whatsoever. Please take care of yourself and take care of others as you always seek the advice of your own medical providers and your own mental health providers regarding any questions or concerns you have about your specific health, or before implementing any recommendations or suggestions from us. These are ideas that have worked for other people. We think it's important to share them. We do not guarantee that they will work for you specifically. Do not stop taking any medications without speaking to your physician, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, mental health provider, or any other healthcare or medical professional. And if you have or suspect that you have a medical or mental health issue, contact your own healthcare provider promptly. Also, one last thing, if you know or suspect that you are currently experiencing a crisis, it is absolutely imperative that you seek the advice of your doctor or other emergency healthcare services prior to ever thinking about using our content. We love the conversations. We're glad you're stopping by. We hope you take a lot from the content. But again, for your specific individual medical situation, please always seek quality personal care from your own providers. Do not let this information or this advice stand on its own. Thanks so much for listening.